Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The theme or the thoughts of shepherd and sheep runs through quite a number of different passages in Scripture, and we've had a reading from Psalm 23 and from John 10, but I've also put one or two others here. Psalm 100, Luke 15, the parable that we looked at earlier, and I'm going to refer to another bit, which I maybe should have put on the order of service, because, as I say, if you'd like to look at these in your own devotional time, then I encourage you to do that. But there's another bit in Luke 12, which we will refer to as well. Jesus, if we start with John chapter 10, when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, he is speaking to a symbolism or a way of speaking about God that was well known in Israel. Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, written by a man, by David, who had himself been a shepherd when he was younger. And I've said, and you've probably heard me say this before, that when you read Psalm 23, that it reads to me at least as an older person looking back on life, recognizing how God has led and guided and so on. It's not the youngest of young people looking ahead. That there's a testimony here to God's faithfulness over the years, and that takes time and a bit of experience. But these are the reflections. And then it suddenly changes about halfway through. So where it was talking about he, it suddenly turns and addresses God directly as you. And that's about a personal assurance for now and for the days ahead. So when Jesus in John 10 picks up on that and he says, I am the good shepherd, Jesus is putting himself in the role of king, and he is associating himself with the Father. To jump back to David had that experience in his younger days looking after sheep. But then when he was anointed and called to be king, he saw his role as king to be a shepherd to his people. To nurture, to lead, to guide, to protect, to provide pasture and safety. But he saw that he was simply the representative of the one who was the true shepherd, because it is God who's our king and our shepherd and guide and protector and so on. So when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, there is a messianic claim. And there's also, as the passage wears on, if you read it when you get home, he's making a divine claim. And he, first of all, in John 10, contrasts himself with the thief and then the hireling or the hired hand. The thief, he says, has come only to steal and kill and destroy. He come to take. That's when we encounter the thief. Turns up unexpected to take something. I have come, he says, to give, that they may have life, and they may have life abundantly, have it to the full. I'm the good shepherd. In terms of life in the passage there, he goes on, he says, I lay down my life for the sheep. The good shepherd I'm the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I've come to give them life and back to give them life by laying down my life. The hard hand does not own the sheep. And so when the threat comes, the hireling, the hard hand, abandons the sheep and runs away, thinking only of their own personal security. So the wolf attacks. The flock is scattered. He runs away because he's hired and does not care for the sheep. And he's contrasting that with his personal concern and regard for the flock. But also, as we see from that parable in Luke 15, for each and every single one. And it's crucial that we note that, because we're tempted to think of the love of God in general terms rather than in me-specific terms. He loves everybody. Yeah, we don't doubt that. He loves all the world. Yes, wonderful. But then, what about me? And it's shifting, allowing the revelation of that to shift from an intellectual confession that we make into a deeply personal recognition that he loves and he's faithful and committed to me. And he's committed to me in the context of my wandering. You know, that way of singing about the 23rd Psalm, the King of love, my shepherd is. Verse 3 is, perverse and foolish, oft I strayed. Here's the testimony of a person who receives the words of Psalm 23, that he makes them his own, but he also recognizes that that's not the whole story, that in my wandering there is a perversity, and there's a foolishness. It's not just ignorance, it's not just I was tricked or deceived, but there's something perverse. And yet, he sought me. He didn't give up. On his shoulder gently laid, and home rejoicing brought me. Jumping back to Luke 15 and the story of the 99 that he leaves as he goes to look for the one that is lost. Can we note, when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. And then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I found my lost sheep. And then, and he presses this point about the joy, the joyfully putting it on his shoulder, the rejoicing when he gets home, by stressing, I tell you, in the same way, there is more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 so-called righteous who do not need to. Jesus is criticized because he's having fellowship and spending time with and eating with people who were not the savory characters within society. And he's stressing the point that it is a delight to spend time with the sinner. And it's with joy that he brings them back to the Father. It's not just the retrieval of something that belongs to him, but the sheer delight. And when you look, because that's on the first of 3 stories, each one ends with a celebration and the same sentiment, the delight that he takes in each and every single individual. I have other sheep, he says, and they don't belong as yet within the fold. They too will listen, so that there ultimately will be one flock and one shepherd. We're called to have a concern for others who are not yet part of the fold. But the reality is, I suspect probably all of us have a certain lack in that area. And it's because of that lack that we hesitate to take the opportunities when they come to speak about faith, to encourage others. We lack the courage. We lack the willingness, as Jesus speaks, to lay down where he lays down his life. We hesitate to sacrifice, to pay the price of the cost. We hesitate because it is not natural to us or instinctive. It doesn't arise naturally within us. It is something that must be given and imparted to us. And therefore we need to pray and ask God to give us that love and concern for others who are not yet part of the fold. Because only as he gives us that will we know also, we will have the willingness to step out, and which when we do, we'll discover he also grants the boldness. But only as we ask for that will we have the wisdom to know what to say. The word appropriate to the situation, the word that is caring but firm, that is encouraging, but yet doesn't compromise, that because recognizes God's love and God's concern, and there's no point just pretending things are all pleasant and nice when they're not, and the other person knows it. But we need to ask. It will not come naturally. And I'd like us to take that, amongst other things, I hope, some encouraging, but take the need for us to do that. It is only then that the church, and I'm not just talking about Pencaitland, that the church generally will truly grow. When the church genuinely expresses the same heart love that the Good Shepherd has. And of course, he'll give as we ask. Jesus is making a messianic claim, as I've already said. But he's also talking about an identification between him and the Father. He continues in that passage, the reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life. Some thought he was nuts when you read the story, when he said that. And he pressed the point later. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them. They follow me. I give them eternal life. They'll never perish. No one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. My Father has given them to me is greater than all, and no one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one. And at this, they picked up stones. We didn't read this, but they picked up stones to stone him. And he said, I've shown you many great miracles from the Father. For which of these do you stone me? And they replied, we're not stoning you for any of the miracles, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God. because it's God who's the good shepherd. Jesus saying, I'm the good shepherd. He's saying, I and the Father are one. There's a complete oneness between the Father's love and my love. We are completely at one in our concern for the sheep, our concern to impart life, to guide and protect, and to watch over. I know the sheep. He knows the sheep by name when you read the passage. By name, every single last one. Turning more to Psalm 23, and just taking it really as it's presented to us and quite simply. We acknowledge, and we're called to acknowledge, and to make it our personal confession that the Lord is my shepherd. He's our shepherd, but this is very personal. He is my shepherd. My personal guide and leader and protector. And I shall not want. I will not lack. And it's a statement of faith. And I encourage us to, don't be afraid of thinking that you're going nuts, but stand on your own in the bathroom or somewhere else where no one else will hear and make this your personal confession. He is my shepherd. I will not lack. He leads me. He restores me. He provides for me. He guides me. In Luke 10, Jesus, and again I've referred to this Luke 12, sorry, I've referred to this many times, and I maybe should have put this reference on the sheet, but I didn't. It's a reference about how God will provide for us, and he then includes these words, how much more will he do so for you, O you of little faith? The Father knows what you need. Seek his kingdom, and all else will be given and fall into place. Then these words, do not be afraid, little flock. Your Father is pleased to give you the kingdom. The Father is pleased to be our shepherd. He is pleased to go and restore us and to bring us back and joyfully put us on his shoulder. It's a delight to him. He is my shepherd and he cares for me. He makes me lie down in green pastures and leads me beside quiet waters. When we look at shepherds and sheep today, if you look in this area, we have fields and they're all neatly delineated by a fence. And the sheep goes in, there are no predators or anything that are going to really prey on the sheep. Yes, okay, some of the birds will prey on the lambs. And so special care needs to be taken at that time of year. But they're safe. And so the shepherd can put them in the field and go away and just check up on them now and then. Where we lived before coming, we were north of Glasgow and just tucked under some hills. And there the shepherd could actually let the sheep go up on the hills. And it was over not just neat fields at all, in fact, hundreds of acres. But again, it was safe because there were no predators there. And so the shepherd or the farmer could then leave the sheep really to look after themselves. It was very different. Actually, I knew, just in passing, a girl who lived in Lauder on her father's farm, and she was a shepherdess, and she used a horse, to go looking for the sheep. But the others in that area, this was when we lived in Earlston in the borders. There was another friend at school, and his dad had a farm, and delighted to go and help, so-called, with the lambing. I mean, it was more fun rather than, we weren't really a help. But anyway, we were there, but I can remember him. We went up in the Land Rover up onto the hill, and even though they were in fences, in a fenced area, he would whistle, the most piercing whistle I've heard anybody use, and the sheep would come running. They would come running because they knew him, even though he didn't spend much time with them. It's different in the context where this psalm was written, that there were predators, there were no fences. And so the shepherd, rather than putting the sheep out to pasture and then leaving them and then going in and checking time to time, and yes, even then they would, as I say, they would get to know him. But in this context, the shepherd spent all day, every day with the sheep, 24/7, 365 days a year. And the sheep knew him. They knew his voice. He knew each and every one. And so the shepherd could call, and then when the shepherd walked, the sheep would follow. Sheep do that. That's just how they are. They follow each other, and you'll often see that, perhaps on a hillside, or one walks off, and why do some of the others, for their own best-known reasons, they'll all follow. That's what sheep do. That's what they were designed to do in some ways. He doesn't have to round them up. I mentioned the shepherdess who would use a horse, and she'd have a couple of dogs with her. I mentioned the farmer who would maybe have a quad bike or a Land Rover and maybe some helpers and a few dogs, because they had to round them up, even though the sheep knew him. He leads me, and he says it here, it leads me to really it's pools of quiet waters. And I don't know the truth of this, but I've heard, I understand that sheep, only if they're desperate will they drink from noisy rushing water. That it's quiet pools, or it's calm waters. It was imperative that the shepherd lead the sheep from one pasture ground to the next. This is a different climate, where they don't have the richness of fields, perhaps, that we have, the richness at every point of the year. They're in a climate where the grass will grow at some points, and then as the heat comes in the rest of the year, that actually withers away. And so they have to take the sheep constantly from one pasture area onto the next. And he's using these metaphors and this way of thinking to describe how God leads me from one place where he will provide me, but he's leading me on a journey, and he's taking me from one place in life to another, but at each and every stage, he brings me at a place where I can be at peace, where I can be nurtured and nourished, and where he will bring restoration to me, to my inner parts, to the inner person. And the paths along which he guides me are righteous. And he adds in this little bit where he says, and he does it. Yes, he does it because he's my shepherd, and yes, he does it because he loves me, but he recognizes this. He does it for his own name's sake. You know, if we're tempted as I'm sure we are sometimes tempted to question that personal love that he has for us, then let us recognize that it's not just me and my security and my future and so on, which is at issue here. It is his reputation. And if he will not do it because he loves me, which of course he will, but if he won't, then he will do it because it is his reputation at stake. But the psalm then turns at this point, where prior to this he's always been talking about he. He makes me lie down. He leads me. He restores my soul. He guides me. He is my shepherd. Now he turns it and it's very personal. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for you are with me. Having made it his own, he now addresses God directly. And all that provision is even in the midst of the threats and the challenges. And maybe there is, from one pasture area to another, there is some troubled and deep valley or ravine. Yet I'll fear no evil because you are with me. There is speculation, and it's very probably accurate, that this is not talking in some metaphorical way, but that it may well be referring to a particular geographical place or ravine between Jerusalem, which is up in the mountains, and going directly east, but down to Jericho and the Dead Sea and the River Jordan, which comes into it. There are some very steep chasms, and the paths, if they go along the bottom of that ravine, given the steepness of the side and the narrowness, that the sun, yes, there's light comes, but the sun rarely, if ever, shines at the very bottom of the valley. And that the valley of the shadow of death, or the valley of death's shadow, is actually the name of a place. We don't know. It might be. But whatever it is, whatever the risks and the dangers, if you can think in those terms, those are great places for a predator to lie in wait. But I'll not be afraid because you're there. And it's the presence of the shepherd that he knows. But then adds this, your rod and your staff comfort me. And there's a distinction here between the rod and the staff. The staff being what we might think of as a shepherd's crook, big staff, the shepherd walks with that, curly top perhaps. A way of holding a sheep in check if need be, or possibly dividing one lot of sheep going a different way. But the rod is different. The rod is essentially a club. And if you think of a policeman's truncheon, and maybe a bit longer than that, it's a weapon. And it speaks of the protection that the shepherd bring. That club, that rod, would be, pardon me, the rod may have bits of metal in it, or stones at the end, like a mace. And in fact, that's the origin of the royal mace. We've all seen probably enough of Parliament in the news over the last months, but the mace is this golden mace that is brought in and then taken out every day in Parliament. That's a symbol of royal authority. It's a symbol of power. And it actually has exactly the same origins here. That's the rod. And so it's the authority, it's the power, It's the fierce protectiveness of God. It comforts me. And you prepare a table before me, and the imagery changes from the shepherd imagery to a domestic scene. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, even in the midst of all the threats and challenges. You anoint my head with oil in the midst of all the threats and challenges. There is an overflowing cup. And we can note again, and I've stressed this at other contexts, when it's not a cup that is just adequate for our circumstance, but a cup that overflows. When he fed the 5,000, when he fed the 4,000, 12 baskets left over at one, 7 baskets at the other. You've heard me refer previously to the changing of the water into wine and the almost ridiculous quantity of wine that is made. It's an overflowing cup. It's the lavishness which it speaks of. And then this testimony, surely, surely, his goodness and love will follow. Perhaps more accurate to say, will pursue me all the days of my life. And my dwelling place is with him in his household, part of the family, forever. Amen.